Hey there! Thanks for clicking on my face. This video is for any game masters who are considering running a Spelljammer campaign in 5th edition. I want to answer the question, should you spend $70 on this new box set of 3 books in a DM screen? Is this resource helpful with DM adventure prep? Is this resource helpful when understanding wild space and Spelljammer ships and combat? These questions are best answered by looking at the Dungeon Master screen and the Astral Adventurer's Guide, so we're going to zero in on these two today in today's video. So at first, I'm going to have to shout out that this art is absolutely gorgeous. I haven't gotten a new Dungeon Master screen in quite some time, and I gotta say that if I am able to, most of my games are run online these days, but if I am able to, I am absolutely going to try to run something like this in person, just because I love how beautiful this is. Rules-wise and what's on this thing, this is actually one of the best constructed DM screens I've seen. There's information on setting a DC, very useful for new DMs. Information on what ability checks, just nice, easily to glance at. It also includes rules for suffocating, rules for weightlessness in space, which includes things like messing with your melee attacks and the way that movement works. It's got 2 little maps here, one of them of a potential astral plane layout with like the different orbs of wild space, and then the other one is to kind of show how air and gravity works around a nautiloid ship or a spelljammer. In the center panel here, it's got stuff about building encounters, which is really nice. It references monsters from both Boo's Astral Menagerie, the other book in this, and the original monster manual. Cool thing about the encounter tables here is there's a lot of different symbols on them that tell you what book you should be referencing. It also has an additional symbol that shows you whether the creature that it's referencing is a spellcaster and therefore would be able to pilot a spelljammer ship. Also got a table for the initial attitude of the encounter that you're rolling up. This is really nice that I've seen a couple different systems for, and it just helps if you're trying to roll a random encounter or just in your dungeon prep of trying to spark that idea of, is this a hostile thing, an indifferent group, a friendly group, and how does that change the role play? How does that maybe turn into combat? Outspace encounters, astral sea encounters, and if one of those includes a ship, there's a D100 table for rolling what kind of ship that is. Stuff for ship mechanics, somewhat related to that. This is what I was really hoping to sink my teeth into with this supplement, and as I talk to you more about it, you're probably going to see that I was left a little bit wanting, but all in all, I think it's great for a new Dungeon Master that's just trying to get things off the ground. It discusses ship-to-ship distance in 3 different ranges, 250, 500 and 1,000 feet away from one another. It specifies what weapons kind of work. It's got rules for crashing. It's got tasks on here for more downtime activities. It's a D12 table that are basically roleplay opportunities that a Spelljammer captain could give to their crew. There's a D10 table here of ship quirks, ranging from a harmless haunted spirit to the ship always having a briny scent in its air pocket, just something to give the ship's flavor. There's also 2 separate D12 tables on here for ship cargo. One of them is for cheap cargo, the other's for expensive cargo, and it's probably going to be very useful to me when I'm rolling for loot off the top of my head. My closing thoughts is that this is a really nice DM screen. The art, like I said, is gorgeous. The tables on here actually feel like something I would use as opposed to some of the older DM screens that have been out there. And I think overall this is a really good tool for a Dungeon Master who maybe knows about the 5e rules but might feel intimidated by this fantastical setting. Okay, the next thing I want to talk to you about the Spelljammer pack is the Adventurer's Guide, the Astral Adventurer's Guide. This is broken up into 3 chapters: Character Options, Astral Adventuring, and the Rock of Brawl. We're going to focus mostly on Chapter 2, as this seems to be the part that I would primarily use as a Dungeon Master prepping this setting. Chapter 2 talks about a Spelljammer's speed and the way that a pilot interacts with the ship. If you don't know, when a pilot kind of plugs into the Spelljammer chair, they can sense everything around the ship, which is kind of a cool little flavor. It also gives rules, I didn't know this was a thing, for having 2 different helms on one ship at the same time, boiling down to competing concentration checks for wrenching control away from another pilot. The chapter is also filled with a lot of setting specifics. Going into detail on air envelopes around ships in wild space, rules for non-magical fire. As far as creating your own wild space system, homebrewing one or coming up with your own, it does refer you to the Xerxes book, which is where the adventure module of it is. On page 41 and 55 of this book, there is a model of wild space, or I should say of a place called Doom Space and a place called Xerxes Space. And, you know, players, just at a quick glance, no spoilers, I don't really think, but that's kind of what it looks like. It's a mapped out version of a solar system. And as someone who just spent a couple of months ago whipping up my own wild space setting, I think this would have saved me a couple hours of prep time. It is pretty well put together, gives each of the planets and moons special flavor. So if you wanted to make your own, that's a really good jumping off point. Just kind of take that stuff, cut out what they have, and paste in your own. The next little bit here talks about the cost of a spelljamming helm, the specifics to how you attune to that item and how you can transfer attunement. It then goes into a standard spelljammer crew, and finally we get into a little bit about ship-to-ship combat. Unfortunately, there's not a ton here. It has the same distance chart that is on the Dungeon Master screen that tells you how far certain weapons can reach, and then it refers you to the Dungeon Master's Guide to use the side initiative rule, which a lot of people also refer to as group initiative. And I agree with this. When you're doing ship-to-ship combat, group initiative is going to be the simplest. It does have rules for moving around, steering, and crashing, which will probably come up in combat and are also listed again on that Dungeon Master screen. There are rules for ship repairs, and it declares that all Spelljammer ships typically have one or more shipboard weapons. These are typically ballista or mangonels, which is apparently another word for catapult, or like a trebuchet that I've never heard of before. Going off of weapons, there are rules for 16 different ships in this book. Most of them have a ballista or a catapult or some sort of ram. The stats for these weapons are very detailed and specific, including loading times, the cost of ammunition, the weight of ammunition, when you're calculating how far they can go. If I'm going to be honest, I feel like we could have seen some more fantastical options. The coolest thing in here is the eye cannon from a beholder and the tentacles on a nautiloid ship from a mind flayer. With 16 different spell options, I kind of would have expected to see something a little bit more crazy than just ballista and catapults. But, it also would have been cool to see something that isn't a weapon, like maybe some sort of item that temporarily boosts AC, or an item that enables a type of magical attack. I mean, the ship is flying with magic to begin with, so it doesn't seem that unreasonable that the Spelljammer would be able to fire off some sort of magical firebolt or arcane energy. But each ship has basic stats, and this is kind of really quickly what the thing looks like. They all have these maps and things like that too, which is very useful. I would scan this and put it in front of my players if I want a virtual tabletop or at a table. But they have stats such as armor class, hit points, damage threshold, which is how much damage you have to deal before you even start worrying about the hit points. It has the speed, which was nicely listed in feet and miles per hour to give some context. It gives the cargo's max capacity, the crew size that would be needed to potentially run this ship, the keel and beam length, which is just kind of like the width and length of the ship. It also includes how much it would cost to purchase one of these ships. So how would I use this product if I was preparing a Spelljammer campaign? Well, I would use the screen. I think that would be very helpful for adventure prep, whether you're rolling up ideas or just want to read through it for inspiration. If you have to pull something together on the fly, if you're comfortable with that style of DMing, I think you could grab this Dungeon Master screen, put it in front of you, and run a pretty decent game. It's got great detail on a lot of different ship activities and rules, but I really would have liked to see some other PC options for combat maneuvers, or more customizable weaponry or ship add-ons. I'm probably going to do a lot of homebrew work to flesh out the ship combat into something a little bit more dynamic than let's ram the enemy ship as quickly as possible and get into traditional D&D combat. The maps are very nice within all of this, both of the ships and the wild space systems. I think the detail is great. It's pretty art too, and it would definitely help a novice Spelljammer DM jump right into this session quickly and comfortably. All in all, if you want to run a Spelljammer setting, this is a useful resource. Probably a little expensive. I'd say I was able to build my campaign world pretty well without something like this, but it's easily would have saved me a good chunk of hours in streamlining my processes. If you're wanting to use this to build a Spelljammer campaign and be ready for your first session off planet, this is in a wild space system. This is a pretty solid resource if you're willing to shell out the cash. Really only invest in this if you are passionate about running this setting, or if you have players that really want to do it. As of right now, I'd say this isn't something you should pick up just for like the extra monsters and character features, which is what I normally do with different setting books. Although I haven't looked at any of those too deeply yet, so maybe that'll change and maybe that'll be my next video. So that's everything I'm going to talk about today regarding using this resource to prep a Spelljammer campaign. Hope you found some of this useful. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. This is Kale for KD&D, signing out. See you next time.